Okay, well, we're ready to go. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm Richard Kravitz. I'm director of the UC Center Sacramento. Usually when I talk about what we do at UCCS, I say we do two things. We educate California's future leaders through experiential learning with academics and internships, and we share knowledge that's produced on the 10 University of California campuses in the interest of better public policy making. But we also do a third thing, which is to promote exchange between the political and the policy community and the academic and general community, and that's what we're here to do today. To introduce our special guest, I'm pleased to introduce Professor Thad Kauser. He's a professor and chair of political science at the University of California, San Diego. He's the author of many, many articles and a number of books, including one called Curiously, The Logic of American Politics, which I sometimes wonder about. But he is the winner of several research awards and the Distinguished Teaching Award at UCSD, as well as many other accolades, and we're very proud to have him as a member of the UCCS Faculty Council. So Thad, thank you for being here, and you'll introduce the secretary.
All right, thank you, Rich. Thanks so much to all of you for coming, and we are honored and thrilled to have Secretary of State Alex Padilla here at the UC Center Sacramento today. Secretary Padilla is a nationally recognized expert on elections. Should come as no surprise since he's been winning them since he was age 26. Won a seat on the Los Angeles City Council, quickly became president of that city council, making him both the youngest president and the first Latino president ever. Was elected to the California State Senate in 2006, and there he introduced legislation in one passage in a wide variety of areas, including climate change legislation, legislation to help English language learners, the first smoke-free housing law, and if you've ever tried to enjoy a Big Mac or double-double and seen how many calories it is on the menu, you actually have Secretary Padilla to blame for that legislation. Since winning election to the Secretary of State's position in 2014, he's worked alongside legislative leaders to pass a package of election reforms that will make California a national leader in modernizing and transforming the way that voters register and cast their ballots. And that's what he's here to talk to you about today, about his vision for implementing these reforms over the 2018 and 2020 election cycle. And this is a set of reforms that each of them is very important individually. They're important individual steps, but taken together, they're a leap that gives the opportunity for California elections not only to increase turnout, but to broaden that turnout and make sure that California electorate of tomorrow reflects the residents and the population of tomorrow's California. So because of this, it's been a national model. Policymakers across the states are looking at it. Reformers across the states are looking at it. Academics across the country will be studying it. And we have a group of 12 researchers at 5 UC campuses who have come together to study these reforms. You can see a flyer about this project. You can contact me for more information about it. And I just wanted to briefly recognize some of the folks who are involved in it. So Mindy Romero from UC Davis is one of the researchers involved. Seth Hill from UC San Diego. And the Honorable Denise DeChaney, who you know as former Assembly Budget Chair and Senate Budget Chair, and we're very lucky to have her teaching classes for us at UC San Diego. So we're going to be back presenting these reports, the results of our research to policymakers and to the general public here at a series of events right here in this room at the UC Center Sacramento in 2018, 2019, and 2020. But we're all thrilled right now and looking forward to hearing from Secretary Padilla talking to us about his vision for implementing these reforms, and we're just thrilled to welcome him. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Alex Padilla.
Well, this one or this one? Can I get some tech help? All right. Hands-free. There we go. Well, good afternoon, everybody. And thank you for your interest in elections. You're just like, come on, we're going to have this gathering about registering people to vote and how to make it easier. Hello, anybody? But before I kind of dive right into sort of the meat and the technical aspects of the reforms that are underway now and that I'm actually very excited about, let me just spend a couple of minutes on why I think it's important, why fundamentally it's powerful, and why we should all care. And because in the introduction you got into a little bit of the bio of some of my public service piece, let me talk to you about the pre-public service Alex Padilla. Because as I tell a lot of high school kids these days, to be honest, being in an elected office and being involved in politics is the last thing I thought I wanted to do when I was growing up. Grew up in the northeast San Fernando Valley, community called Pacoima, son of immigrant parents, proudly. But just to give you a flavor, consider this. When I turned 18, and yes, my high school government teacher was talking about why I needed to register and vote, not once did I recall a conversation at the dinner table between my parents about who was running for what. Not once did I recall, neither did my brother or my sister, going to the polls with my parents in November to cast that ballot and be part of, doing your civic duty. Why? Is it because my parents didn't think it wasn't important? No. I mentioned a second ago, my parents were immigrants. They weren't eligible. It wasn't until years later, my parents were in the United States of America as legal permanent residents for nearly 30 years before they decided it was time. And they applied for citizenship, went through the process, and became U.S. citizens. And by the way, they've never missed an election ever since. But growing up, it wasn't something instilled in me that way, and let alone as many young people, high school students, college students, as you might have heard, can be kind of cynical about politics and politicians. And as I was growing up looking somewhat as to who my representatives were, and you watched the news, back then you watched the news, you didn't just scroll through your Facebook feed. To see what politicians were up to, it tended not always to be good stories, if you know what I mean. And the faces of who my representatives were rarely came to my school to come talk to us, to motivate us, to talk about public service and internship opportunities. And so it was really nothing that I connected with or could relate to. So what was I going to do with my life? Well, plan A was to play professional baseball, because the odds are really good for that, right? But I was smart enough to know I needed a backup plan. And because I liked math and somehow did well in science, my counselors, my teachers said, well, you ought to be an engineer. And so that explains the MIT thing, for those of you who are interested. But coming back from college, in 1994, I came back to two life-changing developments in California. Number one, a big recession at the time, right? Post-Cold War, Defense Department cutbacks, aerospace industry contracting, so that mechanical engineering job that I had at Hughes Aircraft was tough to hold on to. Number two, if you all remember, some of you remember, those of you who were alive, November 1994, there was a measure on the ballot in California known as Proposition 187, which sought to deny immigrants and children of immigrants public services. So depending on the attorney you might talk to, that it could include being able to go see a doctor if you didn't have insurance and had to go to a county clinic, or even go to school, because that's considered, in some ways, a public service. And that's when my eyes opened. That's when I realized, as cynical as I was, as disconnected from politics as I was, I had no choice but to get involved, because if I didn't get involved, if my community didn't get further involved, we'd continue to be a target, right? It was very, the whole presidential election cycle, and a lot since then, by the way, has been very reminiscent of that political climate in California back then. And so, like a lot of things in life, if you're going to do it, jump in with both feet. And so I did. Became a campaign volunteer and then an organizer before I knew what an organizer was. I was just told, go knock on doors, go register voters, you got to get more people to vote. Was volunteering on campaigns, eventually managed a couple of legislative campaigns for underdog candidates, by the way, before I ever ran for office. So for me, serving as Secretary of State is life sort of coming full circle. Once upon a time, I was the door-to-door, standing in front of the grocery store person, trying to get more people registered, more people to vote. And now I get to do it for the whole state of California. And that's kind of cool. And so what are we doing? Because when I ran for office, for this office, I knew what my reasons were, ideas on how to make the office, the agency better, trying to boost our grades, if you will, of California as measured from a civic engagement standpoint, right? What's the voter registration rate? You know, how many eligible but unregistered voters? What's the turnout rate, typical turnout rate? Most of the studies, most of the reports I saw going into the 2014 cycle was California being near the bottom of the list, right? Somewhere in the mid-40s on most indicators. Turnout, by the way, when I ran for secretary, that November 2014 was 42%. 58% of registered voters didn't show up. And that didn't reflect the 5.5 to 6 million eligible but unregistered voters. And so as I talk about these reforms, yes, part of it is how do we move the needle in a positive direction? How do we get more eligible people on the voting rolls? How do we get more registered voters to actually cast their ballot? Because fundamentally speaking, that's when our democracy works best. When more people participate, when the electorate better represents the people, right? We can't expect our government for the people unless it's of the people and by the people to begin with. But more importantly than that, I challenge you all to consider for a moment the who it is we're talking about. Smart researchers here in this room that have already done work in this area. Who is it that tends to be eligible but unregistered? Who is it that tends to be registered but not a very frequent voter or high propensity in campaign terms? It is disproportionately lower income families and communities. It is disproportionately communities of color, the Asian community, African American community. This is California, by far the biggest, the Latino community. And it's young people, millennials. And so when you stop and think about it, here's what moves me as having spent 8 years in the legislature, caring about a lot of things. Yes, public health, whether it's rates of type 2 diabetes or anything else, maybe education and equity, right? Think about the schools in your community that don't have the high test scores. Think about environment, access to clean air, clean water, et cetera. You know, it's the same communities that are disproportionately suffering from low civic participation rates. So I would argue that if you want to lift up a community from a policy, social issue perspective, part and parcel with the solution is lifting up the political voice of the community, and we do that by getting them more engaged. So anything and everything that we do to get more eligible Californians registered and on the rolls, and then get more registered voters to cast ballots in the election, the better it is for democracy, but the better it is for public policy as well. So that's why we do what we do. So how is it that we're doing that? You know, coming in to the position of Secretary of State, California was one of the first states to already have implemented online voter registration. And we promoted the heck out of it in the 2016 cycle and broke the records. When I came into office, 17.2 million registered Californians. When the deadline came for the last year's November election, we were at 19.2 million registered voters. A net addition of 2 million voters on the rolls in California in 2 years alone. But there's still that lingering, 5.5 million or so eligible but unregistered. So we're not settling for just promoting online registration. My first initiative as Secretary of State was to propose to the legislature, thankfully they passed, the governor signed into law, automatic voter registration. And I'm proud to say that come April 1st of 2018, we're going to activate automatic registration in California. And simply the way that'll work is this. For anybody who's eligible, right, if you're 18 years old or older and a citizen of the United States, when you apply for or renew a driver's license or a state ID through the DMV, the default will be that you're added to the voter rolls. Unless you're just cranky and choose not to be a voter, then you do the work of opting out. But the default will be opt in, And we believe over time we'll capture 90% of that eligible but unregistered part of the electorate. And let me just take a moment to talk about how profound I think that really is. Because some people argue or try to argue that it's not really that complicated. If you really want to be a registered voter, you can do it online. You can get the form at, the library, the post office, wherever it is. But think about this. First of all, as easy as it may be, the numbers show otherwise. Millions of people eligible but not registered. Number two, from a civic participation standpoint, if you're eligible to vote in California today but not registered, you don't get the voter information guide. If you're eligible to vote in California today but not registered, the county does not send you the sample ballot. If you're eligible to vote in California but not registered, most campaigns and candidates are not knocking on your door asking for your vote. So the sheer process of systematically adding people to the rolls will create all this activity, and you better believe participation rates will go up. That's a good thing. But as we have seen cycle after cycle, just because folks are registered doesn't mean that they all turn out and cast their ballot. And that's for a number of things. The one bill I guess we should legislate next year is more inspiring candidates, because I can't be the only one. But there's a lot we can do, in terms of how we administer the election that's more convenient, more friendly for the voter, right? Heaven forbid. And no, I'm not talking about reducing early voting. I'm not talking about voter ID. I'm not talking about purging eligible voters from the rolls. That's what other states are doing. In California, we're trying to show a different way and a better way. So we already talked about the voter registration piece of it, right? Because you can't vote unless you're registered. So from online to now automatic registration, we're going to make significant progress. And so my second initiative as secretary that we proposed to the legislature, and thankfully they passed it, the governor signed it into law, is known as the Voters' Choice Act. And we're fundamentally changing how we actually conduct the election in a way that makes it easier for voters. And so let me explain how it works by way of contrast. To vote today, because you're all very frequent voters in this room, you know that you have two options. One, you can vote by mail, and more people do each and every cycle. More than 60% of Californians now choose to get their ballot in the mail. But if you want to vote in person, the other 40% insists on it, like my mother. She refuses to vote by mail. I want to go in person. Guess who takes her to the polls every election day? But I believe she has that right. She should have that choice. But we can make that experience still better. And so under the Voters' Choice Act, counties have the option to do it the old way or the new way, and the new way looks like this. 4 weeks before Election Day, all the voters in that county automatically get their ballot in the mail. Don't have to ask for it. You don't need an excuse. It automatically comes to you. If you look at other states where it's all vote by mail only, like Oregon, like Washington, one of the things that you'll see when they made the transition is turnout goes up. More people participate when it's easier. I know, it kind of blows your brain, but it's true, and it's a good thing. But California's big, we're diverse, and people who want the in-person option, I believe, deserve that in-person option. But there's a way to make the in-person experience even better. So if you were to look at, as we did, the state of Colorado, you can improve upon that in-person option by modernizing polling places as we know them to what are known as vote centers. And here's kind of the difference. Today if I go vote in person, and I do, told you about my mom, you got to go to the right polling place because you have that one location close to where you live that you're assigned to. And I don't know about the Sacramento area, but I know in Los Angeles we have this thing called traffic that makes it sometimes tough to get from point A to point B quickly. But if you get to your polling place, you got to stand in the right line because there's maybe multiple precincts in one location. And then when you get to the front of the line, you get to the poll worker, and the first thing they do is start flipping this big ledger, right? They got to find your name in the book. Then you got to sign in this teeny tiny box. And then you get your ballot. Imagine if we modernized the experience where it wasn't a paper ledger, but it was a laptop or a tablet. And that poll worker can, with a couple of keystrokes, look you up electronically. not only effective and efficient, but all of a sudden that vote center is not limited to only the voters that are registered in that neighborhood. They can have access to the whole county's voter list, right? What does that mean for the voter? All of a sudden, we provide for voters the option of voting anywhere in the county that's convenient to them. So maybe it's more convenient to vote closer to work. Maybe it's more convenient to vote where I drop my kids off at school, or the grocery store, or the shopping mall. That geographic flexibility is hugely empowering. And it gets better. The Voters' Choice Act calls for these vote centers to be open for 11 days, up to and including Election Day. Because that first Tuesday after the first Monday in November can get kind of busy for some folks between work and commute and kids or whatever else we call life is throwing at you. So maybe it's more convenient to vote the week before. Maybe it's more convenient to vote over the weekend. You can vote anywhere in the county, and that's all if you didn't vote by mail to begin with. So other jurisdictions that have adopted these reforms have seen turnout go up. These vote centers, by the way, are also helpful for another reform that people should be proud of, and that's generally referred to as same-day registration. Technically, it's called conditional voter registration, but it's already the law of the land with an important and fundamental distinction depending on your county. The way the law was originally written says, well, if you want to register and vote after what used to be the deadline, you can still do that, but you have to go to the Registrar of Voters office in your county. Convenient for some, but maybe not everybody. The way we wrote the Voters' Choice Act, we afford that same-day registration opportunity at every vote center. So it's better for the voters, and we hope an incentive for counties to choose to make this transition. So the Voters' Choice Act allows for a little bit more than a dozen counties to make this transition starting next year in 2018. Not all will, but there's at least 5 that have said they will. Nevada County, Napa County, Madera County, San Mateo County, and right here, Sacramento County. Sacramento County is going to move to this new way of conducting elections. So for those of you who live in the county or have friends and family here, spread the word. There's going to be a big education campaign going on the next several months to alert people about these changes and improvements and these choices. The rest of the state's eligible to make this transition starting in 2020. And I'm excited for what it means because it's better for voters. It's actually better for counties as well. And if you couple that with another, I wouldn't call it a reform, but year 3, as secretary, I suggested to the legislature that maybe we ought to move up the primary election day from June to March. Starting in 2020, not 2018, but starting the next presidential election cycle, California will be among the first states to vote, not amongst the last. And so as we're adding more people to the rolls and making it easier for people to cast their ballots, we're making the electorate more reflective of the people, and anybody who dreams of being the next president of the United States, regardless of political party, will have to come pay attention to California voters and California issues, not just come here to raise money. So that is truly empowering. And so, again, I go back to how I opened. It's not just about moving the needle from a metrics standpoint. Yes, that's how we measure progress. But fundamentally, think about who it is that is not reflected in politics today, who it is that's not reflected at the ballot box today, and who it is we're empowering by systematically registering so many more people and increasing turnout. The better representation and the better public policy will come. And thank you for your time today.
Well, thank you so much, Secretary of State Padilla.
Thank you all.